Hello viewers, here we are in the early music studio today. I'm going to talk about the Vihuela, or in this case, it's my Vihuela. I made this one now 10 years ago. I made over the many years now, I think I've made about 15 of them or something like that. And the first thing I'm going to say is it a guitar? Well, it is and it isn't. It seems to be a kind of hybrid between two instruments, the guitar and the lute. It has the tuning and stringing of the lute, and it certainly has the tradition of composition and the repertoire of the lute, but it still looks like a guitar. The two composers that I'm going to mention, Mudarra and Vihuela, published their work before 1550, and both of them give a separate repertoire and tuning for the guitar, which is a small four-course instrument. So the six-course instrument is kind of considered to be the larger instrument. The guitar is kind of the smaller, more, so let's say, popular cousin of the vihuela. In most examples, when we want to copy an instrument or make an early instrument, we would like to have a model for it. So we would look at museum examples, some collections, and so on. So in the case of the vihuela, there are only three rather poor examples that date from the final quarter century of the 1500s, whereas the music comes from the earlier part of the century, the middle two quarters, and so the surviving models give us rather not a very, I would say, not indicative of the main practice of, obviously, the instruments that were played into dust and weren't kept. The surviving models were kept for special reasons, such as their decorative value, and that's always a problem for early instrument copying. So we have to look to other evidence, and the evidence that we can look at is what we call iconography. We see images. So images could include paintings, frescoes, and in a very important example, gargoyles on buildings. So the gargoyles show us two different instruments that form a kind of common ancestor for the vihuela. There are two kinds of vihuela: vihuela de arco, the bowed one, and da mano, played with the fingers. So if that's the case, there was, you could say, the violin and the guitar obviously came from similar or the same instrument originally, and then they diverged and took on their purposes. So eventually frets were added. There's even a fresco, I think it's a fresco or a painting, which shows of vihuela as being played by angels with only 5 frets. So they would have just been playing chords to accompany themselves, probably in a church. The parquetry inlay is interesting because it's done like this. It's long pieces are sawn like that. I made a kind of diamond-shaped stick there, and they can be glued together. You can make them triangular or square, and glued together in long pieces, clamped up, and then we simply cut pieces off like this, inlay them into the top. That makes, the tiles are called parquets, and so the decoration is called parquetry. This is called mudéjar style because the tiles are applied, and in the architectural traditions of the 1500s you can see plenty of buildings that are decorated with these tiles. In this particular case, I followed a scheme that occurred to me that seemed somehow referred to the 1500s. There's a holy trinity of the 3 main tiles, the complex tiles, and the rose decoration is intended to suggest compass, the points of the compass, the so-called age of exploration. And then at the bottom here I have tiles which are intended to kind of feature the bridge, which is a sort of important structural point. So that it draws the eye to these areas on the instrument. Somehow that gives it a kind of magnetism, I would say. Another aspect of this is that these appliques, or these parquets, are intended to make the instrument look like a reliquary. The reliquary is the vessel which contains the saint's remains. They're venerated. Sometimes they're situated in the church. People give devotional attention to them. And so by putting reliquary decoration on an instrument, you're essentially conveying a kind of religious significance to it. And that's a very important part of the tradition of the vihuela. So much of its repertoire is entabulated music from the church. Now we have to ask the question, where does the shape come from? In copying the shapes of the models, I noticed they were based on ellipses. And this is characteristic of the guitar, that the shapes are based on elliptical ideas with two focus points, two radius points. But a very important researcher, Jose Romanillos, publishing a book about Antonio Torres, happened to mention that the vihuelistas were required to generate the shape of the plantilla of their instrument entirely with a compass. So I did this by making one radius here, another one there, and one on the bottom. So that's 4 radii to give the instrument, and of course there's a circle in the center. So that gives it a kind of a pre-17th century feel, because it's a little bit more Palladian in its character. It looks architectural rather than being sort of decorative in the 17th century manner. Then I'm going to talk about the joinery. And here I have a prop. This is how a guitar is made. It's made from a single block of wood that makes the neck, and then the block is built up, pieces are glued here, and then it's carved into a single piece. This is called the slipper or the foot, and what happens is the tension of the strings is cantilevered onto the back, and that makes the back into a sounding, acoustically important part of the guitar, instead of just being flat and unresponsive. It's in this way the vihuela has it has a way of having the strings convey the vibrations onto the back, and that meant, it seemed to me, that the back had to be arched in both directions, like that. So it's arched this way and arched that way. And I noticed that an Italian drawing, the poet Raimundi playing the vihuela under a tree, because the vihuela was also played in Italy, he's got his foot on the case. The case has quite an arch to it. That seemed to lend credence to the idea that the vihuela might have an arched back. I made flat back vihuelas, they were not as good. Arched back vihuela sounded much better. So, the barring of the vihuela goes, at first I thought, oh, well, probably it's going to be something like a lute. We would have ladder bars with little treble bars and J bars and other features of the lute, where the attempt is to make the rather small soundboard distribute the tension more equally over the whole surface. But with this instrument, it seemed better to have, I got the idea from John Rollins in Bellingham, Washington, to have just a main bar here, a main bar there, not very strong, have the top rather thick, because you have to let these tiles in. That means you have to have significant depth in order to be able to do that. And then have a flat bar there, and have almost no bars underneath there. So I've even forgotten what it is. It's just a little bar, I think. So that means that the top is mainly not barred. It's like a 19th century guitar in that respect. It gives it that liveliness. The main wood that's used in this model of my vihuela was pear wood, which I thought it's extremely light, very responsive, and it has a beautiful color, of course, and it seemed to go. I made several vihuelas with heavier woods. I found them unsatisfactory. As you would make a guitar out of rosewood, if you make vihuelas out of rosewood, you'll find they're kind of dead sounding. So that's my little tour of the vihuela. Now I'm going to play a little piece for you. Alonso Mudarra, Conde Claros. that's my vihuela. I've had a lot of interesting experiences with it. I've built quite a few of them. I've played it a lot in public, made a recording. Now I've made a video. So if you've had experiences with the vihuela, you find the music interesting as I do, play it on the guitar, play it on the vihuela, it doesn't really matter. Let me know. I'd like to hear what you have to say.